Become a member, sign in, and start streaming today.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the April 3rd, 2020 edition of Colorado Inside Out. Again, our video conference call edition. Thank you so much for joining us and for bearing with us as we present in a whole different format, but frankly, a format that all of us are getting used to in our new normal. We continue to produce it remotely, so again, there might be a couple of hitches in the get-along that we're not used to in our studio, but thank you for bearing with us, and we're excited to be with you again this week. Let's get started with a quick take on all the Coloradans that seemingly are not able to keep themselves away from the mountains during the COVID-19 lockdown. Patty Calhoun from Westword, let's start with you and your thoughts on the fact that we just simply can't get away from Berthoud Pass and Loveland Pass for some skiing.
Well, you are allowed to go outside and exercise and get air, but you're supposed to keep safe distances. The wild thing is that has been the skiers who've gone up, wanted to climb up the hills, ski down, but can't manage to keep their own distance. And we've had warnings 2 weekends in a row, and I'm sure we'll have them again because we just had new powder.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. Is it simply a matter of the magnetism of the snow, or is it because people thinking, well, if I'm out here in the mountains in the beautiful Colorado Rockies, I simply can't get this deadly disease?
Well, and if you stay far enough away from other people, that's true. A big reason people live in Colorado is they don't want to live without the mountains. But it's important for people to remember that mountain communities have small hospitals, and they would get quickly overwhelmed by a surge. And a lot of them are recovering from the initial CCP virus outbreak back in late February and early March. And so we don't want to have people from other areas coming in. We need to give them some time to chill and be safe. And for the time being, it's probably better not to recreate outside one's own county.
Hear, hear. Elena Alvarez from Colorado Politics joins us. So, Elena, your thoughts on the fact that some of the things that some of our state troopers need to do is handle the traffic jam on Berthoud Pass.
Coloradans are people of the outdoors. I get it. But as to David's point, these mountain communities are really vulnerable right now. And to quote Governor Jared Polis, it's really dumb to be visiting them right now. They have higher infection rates than most of the areas that we do, that we are living in right now. So we just need to stay home, and those traffic jams will subside as we do that.
You're here. And rounding up the panel for his premiere in Colorado Inside Out, Jake Douglas, who serves in the National Labor Commission for the Democratic Socialists of America. Jake, thanks for joining us, and your thoughts on the magnetism of powder up in the Colorado Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Folks need to get out, need to get some exercise, but I think it raises a question that we should have been addressing before of why has there been so much underinvestment in healthcare systems out in the rural areas of Colorado. Folks, the hospital systems out there are really struggling to adapt to the crisis, and raises an important question of why has there been so much underinvestment by the state in these rural areas.
Well, let's get to it. Keeping our eye on the state's response to the crisis. Last Friday, 14 of the 16 state and Senate Republicans wrote a public letter, criticizing what they believe has been a lack of collaboration from Governor Polis during the pandemic response. In the letter, they were also critical of Polis' statewide shutdown order, saying that areas with fewer infections should not be lumped under the order. Patty, we'll start with you. I understand the point, I guess, of wanting more communication, but at this stage of the game, I don't think Governor Polis has actually had a lot of criticism. In fact, he's had a lot of bipartisan positive response. So this letter seemed a little tone deaf in the middle of everything. It kind of reminded me of that scene from Pulp Fiction when John Travolta was upset that Harvey Keitel's character wasn't being nicer to him. It's like, well, pretty please with sugar on top. Please go clean the car. And it's almost like that's what the letter sounded like to me. What did it sound like to you?
Well, as we've discovered, this is not the time for consensus building, sitting around the campfire, singing Kumbaya. You have to move a lot faster. And I think what Jared Polis has done, focusing on data, has been very, very smart. As we've noticed and just talked about, a lot of the communities that got hit first were rural. I mean, you're talking about Gunnison. You're not talking about some of the biggest ski areas, but areas that came up with problems. So to do a statewide mandate only makes sense right now. Essential businesses still can continue, Farms can continue in the rural areas. You can still go grocery shop. What you're not going to be doing, ideally, is infecting a lot of people in areas that simply can't handle it because they don't have the infrastructure.
David, I certainly understood that there's a difference between social interactions and what's going on in Yuma versus downtown Denver. I get that difference. But I don't know if I want to treat the citizens of Yuma with any less care than I would want the citizens of downtown Denver, because a stay-at-home order is for everybody's safety. What did you take away, or what did you think about the letter and then so far the response we've seen this week in the state?
Well, destroying people's jobs is not for their safety in some ways. There's a lot of evidence that shows how unemployment and isolation cause all kinds of bad health outcomes. So whatever you think of the merits, the fact is, as the letter, which was, I thought, quite respectful in tone, and said that they wanted to work with the governor, they wanted to help him succeed, they've been supporting him so far, but he promised them that he would consult with the legislative leadership of both parties in both chambers, and he broke that promise. He didn't even provide the legislators with the text of the order. They had to find it out by reading Marion Goodland's story in Colorado Politics. I think it's questionable whether the legislature after 9/11 should have adopted the Bush administration's model bill that gave our governor so many near dictatorial powers. And if a governor wants to exercise those quasi-dictatorial powers, it'll be better if he does so by consulting with people first before he acts.
Elena, with your work with Colorado Politics, what are some of the things that you're hearing as responses, not only to the letter, but just in general to Governor Polis and the state's response in the last week to 10 days?
You know, I've been hearing a lot of positive feedback about the way that Governor Polis is handling all of this. What I have also heard about this letter is that, you know, we have to remember that it's an election year. And so I think that more than anything, this is an election year statement. These lawmakers are, as we all know, part of a legislative minority. And so they're not going to sit back on an opportunity to really show voters that they're not hanging out in the back seat. And I think that's what this move was really all about.
Jake, there's a couple different angles to this. You can go with what the letter is all about or just simply from Governor Polis's response. But what did you take away from this week's headlines?
In Denver, and I was laid off due to the crisis. And, you know, unfortunately, in order, you know, you look at places like Italy that waited longer, and we need to come together and act as a community to protect people's lives. But I think, you know, 100% right that we can't just let folks who are out of work be left by the wayside. We need to be talking about paid leave. We need to be talking about rent relief to make sure that folks who are, you know, forced to stay home for the benefit of us all are able to survive this crisis and act even more aggressively.
Let's keep looking at the responses. On Wednesday, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that the state legislature could pick right up where it left off when it took a recess on March 14th due to the COVID-19 crisis. In the case, Republicans claim that the gavel amendment passed by the voters in 1988 mandates that the session must end after 120 consecutive days. In a 4-3 decision, the court ruled the amendment was too ambiguous for the current situation. Now the legislature has until July to pass its budget. David, you had a very personal perspective when it comes to this, being involved. Tell us about that involvement and what you thought of the judgment.
Sure. Since I teach Colorado State constitutional law at Denver University, I wrote an amicus brief for the Independence Institute on this issue, and ended up being on the side of the 3 justices rather than the 4. In 1988, Wayne Knox, a very classic liberal Democrat state legislator from Denver, took the lead in shepherding through the legislature as a referendum and then passing by the voters overwhelmingly the gavel amendment, give a vote to every legislator. And it made many reforms in the legislative process. And one of those said that sessions are going way too long. We need to retain a citizen legislator, not have a full-time professional legislator like the dysfunctional states of California and or New York. And so it said that a regular legislative session may be no more than 120 calendar days. And of course, the legislature doesn't get all the work it wants to done after 120 calendar days. The legislature itself can call itself back into special session, and the governor, of course, can call a special session. 120 calendar days is not an ambiguous phrase. Calendar days throughout Colorado law, 140 different statutes, cases, all the precedents, including recent ones from the Colorado Supreme Court itself, show that calendar days is days in a row on the calendar. That's exactly what the phrase means. There's no ambiguity to it. But Attorney General Weiser, on behalf of Governor Polis, claimed that this phrase is somehow ambiguous. And so when the legislature passed a law exempting itself from the 120-day calendar days rule when there's a public health emergency, that's okay in interpreting the so-called ambiguity. As the dissenters pointed out, if the legislature can invent a rule that trumps the Constitution, in one case they can do it in other cases. And this is maybe it seems like inside legislative baseball to folks, but it's actually something quite dangerous, because this tells us we have a 4-3 majority in the Colorado Supreme Court that in an emergency situation will really let the government get away with almost anything, no matter how clear the text of the Constitution.
Elena, it feels that like in any crisis, you're going to find out there are problems to take care of right now, and then it exposes issues that we may or may not take for granted because those things only come up during a crisis. And it seems like a law like this would. I mean, at no point would we ever think about needing to stop the legislature for several weeks like it's going right now, except something like this is going to happen literally twice every 100 years, hopefully. What are your thoughts about how the decision came down and the response to it?
You know, these are really unprecedented times. We've heard that over and over again, but it's so true. There are so many unknowns in this situation. You know, how the legislature will come back together. Will that be virtually? I know that's being considered right now. When this pandemic will really pass by and how it's going to affect the budget. There's just so many unknowns. But I think that one thing's really clear, and there's a political angle here, because some lawmakers have June primaries coming up and they're eager to get out and campaign. The catch is that they can't do that. They can't raise funds, from lobbyists or trade associations while they're in session. So I think we're going to see some action unfold really quickly from the Capitol, and House Speaker Casey Becker sort of echoed that this week.
Elena, that's a good point. I think a lot of folks, you brought up in the last point that there's still an election going on. That's not going to get canceled. It might go mail-in ballot. Well, actually, it already is in Colorado, but it's not going to get canceled. Jake, let's turn to you. Do you think the legislature is going to probably have other responses to how it does business, not just the public policy in Colorado, but how it does business this year, because it feels unique?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at, if you look at any of the predictions that have come out the last few weeks, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of deaths across the United States if this crisis is not taken seriously. We're looking at maybe 1 in 3 Americans out of work this month, which is larger number than at any time in American history, larger than the Great Depression. So I do not want to see our state legislature simply go home and not address the absolutely dire needs that the people of Colorado are facing right now. We need to act and not to just look at the letter of the law there, but we need a government that's able to address the enormous crisis that we're facing at the moment.
Patty, do you sense, what's your sense about the legislature is going to do in response, not only to maybe how they did this law, but is there going to be other ways that they adjust or can adjust how they do business as a legislative body this year?
Well, we're all adjusting, and not to argue with David, although I'd love to if he was sitting next to me. We're all redefining what a calendar is now. We're all on virtual calendars. Things are changing. Denver City Council at the last second had to change their own rules because by city charter, they weren't allowed to have a virtual meeting, even if it's completely accessible to the public. So we're already seeing changes. I think the legislature will focus on the business at hand, that they've gotten some of the bills through. They've got more they're going to clean up. We're not going to see a lot of our big issues dealt with this year. We're not going to have a transportation bill go through, for example. But I think when the legislature gets back, they will deal with a lot of important issues, including how to deal with something like this if it comes up again. And maybe they'll redefine the calendar for all of us by law.
I'm starting to think about Julian calendars and everything else, and that's probably for a CIO for another day. But there might be some new calendar definitions indeed, Patty. Homeless shelter organizations and Denver city leaders are considering creating a consolidated shelter that would be open 24 hours, 7 days a week. They say this is necessary because individual shelters are facing a shortage of staff and because libraries and other public spaces that usually have resources for the homeless are closed. Elena, you're our expert when it comes to Denver issues, covering Denver politics and beyond for Colorado politics. This is, I think, one of these things that people always know that there's a homeless issue in Colorado, but in a crisis like this, we have to handle it completely differently. What are you hearing from Denver sources about how they're going to handle it?
You know, the city right now is being pretty tight-lipped about everything. But what we do know is that the National Western Center is being considered as an option. The city is exploring all different locations with service providers. They're partnering together to sort of figure out logistics behind all of this. And service provider leaders have been told that the transition could happen as soon as April 6th, although I'm not quite sure if we're still on track considering how quiet the city is still being. There are some rumblings among homeless advocates and even some employees that work for these shelters who aren't happy with this idea and think that putting, many different communities within the homeless population under one roof is not a good idea and can present a whole host of problems. So they're sort of pushing more down the route of taking up vacant motels or perhaps apartments where people can really, have their own space and be sheltered that way. One thing that everyone is agreeing on, though, is, as you said, Dom, our shelters are overcrowded and they're understaffed. And so something really needs to change here.
Jake, as we look at the homeless issue in Colorado, I think right now in the part of the crisis where we know there's an economic ripple effect for a whole lot of people, homeless folks are already in a situation financially, and we're already in desperate straits. Are advocates able to do enough right now to address the particular issues facing this part of our population?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, at the moment, we have something like 10,000 of our, sisters and brothers out there on the street every day who, are in violation of the stay-at-home order because they have no home to go to. And I definitely do not think, agree with groups like Denver Homeless Out Loud that shepherding folks into one centralized location is going to solve this issue right now, when so many folks who are unhoused already are, immunocompromised, already have physical and other ailments that make them particularly susceptible to the disease. And so what I think, we really need to start thinking about is why do we have so many folks who are homeless in Denver when there are tens of thousands of empty luxury condos and hotel rooms downtown that could easily be used to house folks, in a time of crisis like this. The governor has the authority to use, his executive powers to take possession of, hotels and other places like that downtown in a moment of crisis like this. And I think we really need to start thinking about how can we get people that kind of individual care they need to make sure that they can survive this crisis and not just be treated as something we'd rather not like to see.
Patty, it's not as if the homeless issue in Denver or in other parts of Colorado was easy before this crisis, and now it just became a Rubik's Cube. Now that you dunked it into a tank full of piranhas, it's only become more difficult. What do you think of the city's response, and how should it be hashed out?
Well, you're right that we haven't solved this, and if we haven't solved it in good times, we are not going to solve it in bad times. What we can do are do some fixes. Aurora did wind up taking over a motel or a hotel in an unnamed location for their homeless who would want to go into it, who are healthy to go into it. I don't know if Denver's plan is going to come through. It has been secretive, but we also have snow, which is moving people into the shelters, making it more crowded. And then when good weather comes up again, those who don't want to go into shelters, and they have a lot of reasons they don't want to go into shelters now, much less one massive shelter, they're going to scatter along the streets. I mean, I've been driving around a lot, and you do not see social distancing right now among the homeless. That's an issue too with the health concerns. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, really, because everyone is homeless for a different reason. And we're going to have some new homeless who are going out on the streets now because they have no place to live because they can't pay their rent.
David, it's a complex issue. We're not going to solve it here, and I don't think the city is going to have some sort of magic wand. But what do you think of the decisions being made right now? What are some of the questions that should be being asked by these leaders about tackling this problem?
Well, as Patty says, it's a long-standing problem, and it's a diverse problem. People have various reasons, including substance abuse or just losing their job, or all kinds of reasons. And not every one solutions for one won't work for another. But I like the idea of there being a 24/7 shelter at some point, because as your question said, well, now the libraries are closed, and so homeless people don't go there in the daytime. Well, I'd like to help the libraries and librarians. Libraries are supposed to be safe spaces for learning and education and research, and let's let librarians be librarians again, instead of having them have to be the people who are administering treatment for drug overdoses. So I'd like the idea of giving homeless people someplace to be in the daytime as well.
Let's get a quick take on this last one. It's the first week of the month, which means bills are coming due. With widespread unemployment and people missing work due to infection, many are struggling to pay the rent, water, and electricity and phone bills. Governor Polis has put a pause on evictions for 30 days, but some leaders are calling for larger action. Jake, we'll start with you on this one. Your short take on the response of only pausing evictions for 30 days. Should that be longer? What else should be done?
Yeah, you know, I'm a food service worker, and when the order came down, you know, me and so many service workers in Denver like me have been thrown out of work. And my partner, who I live with, is immunocompromised, and so, you know, she can't go get another job as well. I can't go out and work at something like a grocery store, because if I got the virus, literally I could come home, bring it home, and kill her. Like, it's that serious. And so, you know, although it's been great that Denver has halted evictions and utility shutoffs, we really need to think about what are folks going to do who are out of work and can't pay. Every rent day that goes by is hundreds and thousands of more dollars of debt that people are going to be taking on. And if nothing is done, we're going to be looking at, you know, mass debt and mass evictions at the end of this crisis for folks, you know, through no fault of their own. And so DSA, Democratic Socialists America, city councilors like Candy Tabaka and Chris Hines are taking up a call to ask the city of Denver to do everything in its power to cancel all rent and mortgage and utility payments for the duration of the crisis. There are states like New York, which have already introduced bills into the state Senate there to put this into action so that folks can stay in their homes and be safe as they need to be for all of our sakes, and not be saddled with enormous debt at the end of this crisis.
Patty, your quick take on something that's probably going to become a larger problem before it becomes smaller.
Well, like the homeless issue, it's not like rent was cheap in Denver before this. We already get people who had a lot of trouble making their ends meet. They're living in tight quarters because they're sharing spaces. So they're going to have to, it's going to be tough for them to come up with rent even a month from now, 2 months from now, after having been out of work. So some kind of program in the city and the state that will not only prevent eviction, but help them come up with money to pay for future months would be really needed.
David, your thoughts on this issue that's bound to grow bigger?
Well, if somebody's lost a job and they can't pay rent this month, first of all, the way to start is to try and work it out personally with the landlord. And I agree with the rule that we shouldn't have evictions at this kind of situation for people who did lose their jobs through no fault of their own. But the notion of canceling rent for everyone is really just a fancy name for theft. If you live in someone else's property and you have the money to pay the rent, but you won't contribute anything to pay for the maintenance or help the landlord pay for the mortgage, you're just taking advantage of a small businessman or somebody else who needs that rental income for food for their family or to pay off the mortgage. You can't have a free lunch for one group without harming other people, and landlords are not greedy Simon Legree type folks. A lot of them are small folks, and then that's how they make their living, maybe in retirement or after a lifetime of hard work and owning a couple rental properties.
Elena, wrap it up for us.
Sure. These are difficult times for everyone, and I think the only way that we're going to get through this is by working together. So both sides really need to find mutually tolerable solutions. And unfortunately, I think that's going to mean some tough trade-offs for both sides.
Well, it's time for a very favorite part of the show. Even a crisis like this, we go with Disgrace of the Week. This is our shorter version edition with only a couple minutes left in the show. Patty, Calhoun, as always, please start us off.
Well, let me return to a million years ago show last month when I thought the Mother Cabrini holiday was a stupid solution to the Columbus Day debacle. I actually went up to Mother Cabrini Shrine right before it closed, and I have to say I found it very comforting. I am happy that's a new holiday.
Patty, I am thrilled to see you convert on this one. That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you. David, your Disgrace of the Week.
Well, happily, a disgrace that appears to be close to ending is the federal government's wrong, dangerous, deadly advice telling people not to wear masks. Senator Michael Bennet says he wears masks himself, urges other people to do so. And if you'd like to see the scientific medical research behind why Senator Bennet is right, go read my article on Complete Colorado this morning.
Elena, your Disgrace of the Week.
I got to give it to Hobby Lobby and the other businesses that have just refused to close their doors and have since been cited and forced to close their doors under the stay-at-home order. They're not essential and they need to cooperate.
Jake.
Yeah, I think there was a story this week about Whole Foods workers in Colorado having been sick as early as December, but having to continue to come into work because the reality is they weren't being offered paid leave. And so how are they going to be taking care of their families? And so I think the continued lack of paid leave, family and medical in Colorado is a Disgrace of the Week for me.
It's an extremely needed part of the show and our tradition. Say something nice. Bumper sticker edition. Patty.
All the people out there making masks, including my mother.
Hear, hear. I'm always a big fan of Mrs. Calhoun. David.
The Allen Company, which is a hunting and fishing gear company in Broomfield, they're making face masks and protective gowns for hospitals. And Senator Cory Gardner, with his great relationship with Taiwan, has just gotten 2 million Taiwanese high-quality face masks shipped to the United States.
Elena.
A new phone campaign was launched in Denver by state and city leaders representing Denver, and it's to help people reach out to the older community and make sure that they're okay. And I think that's pretty great.
And Jake.
Nice thing of the week. Glad to see workers in Greeley taking matters into their own hands when the company refused to take the virus seriously and staged a 800 worker walkout earlier this week, and refusing to, standing up for their own dignity.
Well, that is all the time we have for this episode of Colorado Inside Out. I certainly want to thank all of you for continuing to watch and for checking out everything on pbs12.org. For everybody here at PBS 12 and Colorado Inside Out, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Be well, stay safe. We'll catch you next week.